I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
All right, Chris Brogan on the show. Welcome, Chris. I've already introduced you, so don't worry about any introductions.
I'm so happy to be here, James. Thanks for having me.
Chris, finally I get to have you on my podcast. I've been on your podcast so much that I feel like I've abused the privilege a little bit.
No, mi casa y su casa. I think that it's a great thing. I sort of think of us as, neighbors. Like I would be in your tool time. I would be that guy on the other side of the fence that you only see his eyes.
I don't know that show.
Me neither. Time. I've never seen it. I don't even know what I'm saying.
But I get it. I understand it. So Chris, I'm gonna just say what you're up to. The Freak Show Inherit the Earth is coming out or has come out, depending on when we release this podcast.
Yeah, it's a fun thing, but it's a book about weirdos and misfits and entrepreneurs.
How do you define misfit or a weirdo?
I would say the kind of people who maybe don't necessarily feel like they fit in the general business environment. They're the kind of person who doesn't really want to feel like a sheep or a robot, and who maybe has a good idea for something, but doesn't really understand how that's truly a business. Or they're the kind of person who has a business that appeals to a kind of interesting marketplace. So, Tony Hawk, the professional skateboarder, is definitely a freak. But so is Sam Calagione from Dogfish Head, who makes a beer. And beer is not exactly a weird thing, but the way Sam makes it is pretty weird because he's so ridiculously passionate about every single ingredient. So those are freaks. But, freaks are also the kind of person who wants to be, to use your term, like I did liberally in my book, the employeepreneurs, the kind of people who aren't just going to sit at their desk. They're going to own their commission, their part of the desk, and they're going to make it their business. So I've been having a lot of fun talking up the ideas with people lately just to get a sense of what resonates with them. And for sure, it seems to resonate that there's a lot of people out there who are not yet ready to be robots or sheep.
Well, I think also we're kind of living in this weird economic time where on the surface, all the government data seems to suggest that the economy is doing better than ever. But if you ask anyone how they feel right now, they basically feel really bad about the economy. And in part, the more closely linked they are to having kind of a standard job or a standard career, the more uncertainty exists in the workplace. And a lot of this is because the reality is corporate America is firing huge chunks of employees. So people are either forced to become freaks or entrepreneurs or they're forced into being underemployed, which is a situation that makes them less happy. So a book like yours is very important right now. And I think you really, in your book, what I thought was so excellent is the title's The Freak Shall Inherit the Earth, but the book is really about how to be an entrepreneur from the ground up. I really thought it was one of the best entrepreneur improvement sort of books that I've read pretty much ever. So, in your example of Tony Hawk actually was really interesting. I thought that was a great story in the book where he was this amazing skateboarder as a kid, was doing all these sponsorships, having a lot of fun, having the time of his life. And then, as you point out, he had to learn to take a step back so that he could eventually be a success. Like, I had no idea he had taken a big step back to be a video editor before his amazing success. I mean, now he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, too. This is a theme that I've seen lately a lot, which is a lot of times people think that you make it and you're done, but that is not the way money works. I mean, of all people I could ever talk to about this, you know it quite well, more than most humans do. But, you might see a 9-digit lifestyle for a while, 9-figure lifestyle, and get back down to a 5-figure lifestyle and still figure it out. And I think that, we were told a lot of things growing up. We were told, get a good job after school, go to school, get a good job, and you're set. And that's just a lie. I just went to a fancy people high school the other day, like for the whole day, and spoke to every single class starting at period 1 all the way through the end. And
oh my God, that's a lot of work.
It was. And also, by the way, talk about mental landmines. It was an entire building full of people that, I didn't have a great high school experience, so I got to relive that a lot. But, so this is like a rich people community. And I asked every single group of them, hey, who's gone through that situation? Like mom and dad had a, horrendously not good change of fortune or whatever. And of course, high school, no one wants to put their hand up. It's almost like they all have body odor, but a bunch of hands kept sort of flipping up over the edge of the chair, just enough that I could see, but their friends couldn't, that they had all gone with these crazy reversal of fortune kind of experiences. And to me, the way I was talking about this kind of in 2009 was that pirate ships are way better than the naval fleet because the fleet has to worry about painting the masts all the same color. Meanwhile, we just go after the gold. And I think that sounds cavalier, not to stretch the pun. And it also sounds a little bit like money is the object. But really, I think what's replaced money as the object is a real sense of satisfaction. And that's kind of why I tried to write the book, is to say you can find satisfaction. And your kind of measure of success isn't necessarily always going to be tied to the money, but that could be one of the factors.
Well, it's interesting. Like you mentioned briefly my example. So when I kind of lost everything, I had to take a big step back, and kind of like those high school kids, I was really ashamed of it. Like I didn't want to tell even my own family to some extent, how bad it was and how, and where I was moving. Like I totally had to downsize in every way, and I was unemployed and trying to survive. And I don't know to what extent that's pervasive in the economy, but it's getting more and more pervasive, that people have to get rid of this feeling of entitlement. Like, oh my gosh, I've worked here for 20 years. Now I'm going to keep on getting a raise and promotion. But I think people are getting that. People are starting to realize they need to either be, kind of an entrepreneur at the workplace, so they're indispensable, or they need to kind of either, then the other choices are be an entrepreneur on the side or be fully an entrepreneur. But to some extent, they have to be self-reliant no matter where they are. And I think you give really good examples and kind of step-by-step how to get there, which is why I think your book's really important. Like one thing you mentioned, I really love this. You say willpower is stupid. And that really rung true for me, because willpower is like a really hard thing to do, and it's totally overrated. So maybe describe what you mean by that.
Well, when I said that willpower is stupid, I mean, really what I was kind of trying to go at is the whole concept that so willpower is saying, I really want this thing, even though I know I shouldn't have it, but I'm going to just obsess over it, and I really want it. So for instance, or I really know that I need to get up at 8 a.m. So this time I'm really going to get up at 8 a.m. because I know that's what I'm supposed to do or should. And there's all this language. It's all programming language in our heads that we say that pretty much sets us up to not do that. Because we look at it as the exception to the rule. I'm on a diet means I'm going to willfully try to not eat certain foods, as opposed to this is the foods that I've chosen for myself because I know it fuels my body in a way that's very helpful. I still have to use willpower. So does everybody. There are times, just today, I really, really thought a few extra macadamia nuts would be delicious. But that is not on my plan right now. So it does not go in my belly. But I mean, it's true of business. It's true of everything. James, the other thing is, when my first experiences as an entrepreneur in 2009, 2010, when I was really full out going for it myself, I made a mistake with willpower saying I could go after everything. I could just, why not? And I blew $400,000 of my own dollars as if I had that much to begin with, which I didn't, but I blew like any kind of money I had chasing a lot of projects and ideas. So the other thing that we have to learn discipline over willpower is in what we should say no about. And I know you know about that. And I think that that's a really important lesson.
Plug
that
for my upcoming book, The Power of No.
Exactly. I snuck it in like that. But that's exactly, I think we have to say no as well.
Well, that's really hard, though, because, I kind of find that most people don't know how to do that. Like, people don't know how to say no to their employers. They don't know how to say no to family. They don't know how to say no in relationships. They don't know how to say, there's a saying, the customer is always right. So there's this implication that you should never say no to the customer, which is completely untrue. So I think in general, there's so many different areas where people don't know how to say no. And that is a part of discipline.
I agree. And I think, to the contrary, a lot of times saying no, we say no to the dumb things sometimes, and smarter no's lead to better yeses. So anyway, that's your book, but I agree. And I think that that's part of learning entrepreneurship. I mean, James, when I was younger, and by the way, younger could just be a few years ago, like 3 years ago, I wanted to do everything. I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to write fiction and do comics. I want to do like 100 projects at once. And it's not awful to do that. But, I like to say to people that the sun can warm an entire field of daisies, or you can focus it such that it can burn through an inch of steel. And, you can, either one's nice, but sometimes you need the steel burning. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to share in parts of this book, because I want people to understand that, magic doesn't just happen. You have to actually make the magic happen.
Okay, so let's get down to just straightforward tactics. Let's say I'm working my job. I'm unhappy. I wake up every morning feeling, stuck, feeling like I don't really want to get out of bed, but I have a family to support. I have 3 kids. Maybe I have 8 kids, and then college educations are going to start coming due, and I want to divorce my wife, and on and on and on. What's the first step for me?
One of the first steps I was thinking about is that you have to put some sort of vision forth of where you feel at home and where you feel the best. One of the things so there's that really old book, Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. And a lot of people love to stab that book and say, no, not true, not true. But, there's a lot of missing details in that, kind of like the 4-hour work week doesn't really mean only work for 4 hours. So what I think is, there's a place where we really feel like we belong, and there's a sort of part of the world or an industry that we really think is our home, and that we would, if we were stuck in an elevator with someone, we could talk to them for 4 days about this thing that we're really into and never run out of things to talk about. And somewhere along the line, somebody said, well, you can't make any money with that. And one of the things I realized is that there's always a marketplace for the majority of things that we're into. And sometimes there's some exceptions, and sometimes you have to accept that something might be a hobby and that you've got to find another way to make your loot. But that's a lot less true than people think. And so my first thought is, find that place where you actually can really understand the story inside and out, and that the language, and it's just really your place. And that's kind of like the setting in a book. Then second, who are you in that world? What's your character? Like almost like in role-playing games or something. Are you a rogue, a wizard, or whatever? But it's, how do you fit into this storyline so that you can be helpful? And then do you have some kind of a product or service that would help these people? And can you bring that to bear? You can make all of those dreams while you're sitting at a desk somewhere. I mean, that's what Bukowski did. Bukowski worked post office jobs while he was trying to figure out how to get into the literary world that he most craved to do. Dickens was, I think, like a clerk at the town hall or something. There's lots of people who, kind of had to work their day job until they figured out how to get magic to happen. J.K. Rowling, same thing. I picked authors because they're easy to remember, but, there's lots of stories always like that. So James, to me, the very next thing to do, or the next action to be taken, is basically start figuring out, now that you've got that vision, commit to it. And then what are you going to do to invest in that space? What kind of actions can you take? Because the other worst thing that everyone seems to do is just get stuck in plan-ville. You have to launch a little boat into the water and see what happens with it. And then from there, learn. I
think that's really true. Two comments I have on that. One is, a lot of times people come up with good ideas, but they don't know. They either don't know how, or they don't know what to do next, or they don't know how to execute. They understand that execution is important, but they feel it's really big. And so, I always get back to the example of Richard Branson, where he wanted to start an airline, so he didn't suddenly just buy like 20 airplanes and then, put them in the air. The first execution step was he called Boeing and figured out how to get a good deal on leasing one airplane. And so that's how you start an airline. That's how you do everything. That's how you take you have to find kind of a small first step to essentially launch an airline, or start a magazine, or write a book, or start a plumbing business, or whatever. Always just that one first step. The other comment is, in terms of figuring out, a lot of times people don't know what they love, so they don't know what to do if they want to do what they love. And I always suggest people go to the bookstore, and if there's any one section where they wouldn't mind reading all the books in that section, then that's probably what they would love to do. Like if someone was going to go into the comic book section and want to read every single comic book there, then they probably want to do something related to comic books. That might not mean draw comic books or write comic books, but there's lots of different things in that industry. It's like you were just saying, figure out what your role is. Maybe you do business development deals between comic book companies and movie companies. I don't know. There's a million different ways to kind of slice and dice a pie. And I think all of these things is sort of like a guide to people on how to get out of that cubicle job, or that job where you feel stuck or frustrated, and kind of make it into the world where you're more self-reliant. And you talked a little about success being something that's, some people view it as success with money, or success with some kind of achievement or rank or progress or whatever. But success, when I define it or think about it, success for me means not wanting to be successful at anything. And you get that way as you become more self-reliant, which I think is kind of where you're going with the freak concept, that a freak is someone who's not going to be dependent on the opinion of others, and they're going to be able to carve their own path to success.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's two ways that I like to look at it. One is that part about being self-reliant. My friend Joe called me up one day and he goes, I don't know, this might be bragging, but he goes, I just get the feeling that if you drop me down into any city in the world and gave me maybe $20, I'm pretty sure I could have a business running within a month. And I said,
that's great. That's a good skill.
Yeah. And I said, well, you know what? I feel somewhat like that as well. And I think that, I was telling a person this who was saying, I'm really worried. And I said, well, what's everyone's real worry? They're worried that they're going to be homeless and, having to beg to eat. And I said, unfortunately, a lot of the people that are homeless are people, who are that we see that are homeless. That doesn't count all the hidden people of the world. They have severe mental problems, sometimes also drug problems. They've really burned every single possible bridge. There's a huge distance to fall before you're homeless. I mean, you could have absolutely no money. Point. You might have to live on some couches, but failure is the opposite of success. Sometimes failure is really far below what you think it is, and you can fall quite far and still pick yourself back up again. So that's always a starting point. But to me, success, just to tie off the success thing, I love to say that success is in my definition of it is being able to say no to the things I don't really want to do. Because I think that's, as employees, that's how we always feel, is like if we feel dragged to something, you don't feel all that successful. But that's really my definition.
And you talk about that, like, for instance, for employees, often employees are dragged to meetings. And meetings are probably the biggest time suck and productivity suck and everything suck in corporate America, which then spills down into the employee's life. Like, that's just an hour I wasted, or 2 hours I wasted if I was in a meeting. It's the fastest way to being not productive at all.
No, absolutely. And that makes me think of a really long time ago, back when cell phones and pagers weren't all that popular. And I went to a restaurant and I took the cell phone and the pager off and just kind of stuck it on the tabletop so that they wouldn't fall off my belt into the seat like they always do at restaurants. And the guy at the server says, "Wow, you must be really important." I said, "Let me explain how not important I am. That is a leash. And that means at any time the bosses can say, 'Come back here, doggy.'" I said, "The really important person in this world has a human that has their cell phone, and they turn to the human to find out if they need to be somewhere else." Anyway,
it's funny though, because cell phones it's really addictive. Like most people, I think when they wake up, the first thing they do is check their cell phones and check all their different metrics, whether it's email or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. It's a hard thing to get off that addiction.
I think so too. I think there's two things we're going for there. So first off, we're addicted to distraction. Like, it is the biggest drug that we're not really, we talked for a long time about how food is an addiction that no one really criticizes too badly. They don't like fat people, but no one ever says, "What? You're having a second serving of food?" Well, I think distraction is one of those too. But the second thing we're addicted to is we're addicted to ping and response. I'm really here, and I know I'm here because someone said something on my post or my tweet or my Facebook or whatever.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that as well. Like, I feel like not only, like, I tend to write a lot, but I also tend to publish my writing a lot. And I feel I'm addicted to the ping and response. I ping the marketplace, whether it's Twitter or Amazon or Facebook or whatever, and expect some sort of response back to judge my worth as a human being. And so my daily challenge is to kind of get over being metrics driven as opposed to being me driven.
Absolutely. And I mean, we all do it. I mean, I look on even something as dopey as Instagram and like, oh, how many people commented versus pushing like, because like is too pedestrian, and maybe Jacqueline doesn't love me because she just pushed like instead of left a comment, So I think everyone feels that way. And so we have to break ourselves of that, because it's baloney. Social media doesn't mean love.
Sometimes Claudia doesn't even hit like on my post, and then I get you should see this house then. I get all passive aggressive.
Yeah, you walk around the house sulking. Why didn't you push like on my thing?
Yeah, finally I'll say, you don't really like me anymore. So I get overly honest. But another thing you point out in the book, don't try to know everything. And I think that's a really important thing too, because I think knowledge is what stops people from really kind of expanding their horizon, from taking the execution step. Well, I can't start an airline until I learn how to fly a plane. Like, people don't know what to learn. How do you carve out what you need to know?
Yeah, I mean, somewhere along the line, and I think it was, oddly enough, of all people, Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, who would probably be a fun guest for you. He said,
"Yeah, I like his stuff a lot, actually."
Yeah, me too. He said that sort of the minute you're more than one human removed from the customer, your job is in jeopardy. He said anybody whose job is touching the person who touches the customer is doomed. And I've always thought that about my business. The thing that adds the value, I want to be really close to that thing, not the infrastructure. So for instance, somebody be like, "Man, I'd like to be a successful blogger like you. I'm going to go take WordPress." Or they might actually say, "I'm going to take HTML lessons." And I'll say, well, though I know some rudimentary HTML, I couldn't code my way out of a bag because that's not where the money is. That's why there's, anytime there's a business being outsourced, that's probably not something you want to learn. And so what I do is I spend my time creating the value and not worrying about the design. We just read so we have a friend who's a really smart internet guy who told us that the internet sites that make the most money are the ones that look clunky and stupid. And then Jason Fried or Freed, whatever his 37 Signals name is, just said the same thing in an article in Inc., which was basically, look at Amazon. Amazon's an ugly website that makes, millions and millions of dollars every day. So you know what I like to focus on, James? I like to focus on what's going to deliver value and what doesn't necessarily have to be shiny and stylish. Because I just feel like, though I appreciate great design, I much more appreciate an interaction that continues the relationship and makes value transactions happen.
Well, and now that you say that, I think of like Twitter is like circa 1994 HTML. Like, there's nothing really fancy there at all. Yahoo, there's nothing fancy. If you had never changed internet technology after 1996, you would still have probably the same websites would be successful with exactly the same designs, except for maybe with the exception of YouTube.
That's true. I mean, you're right. I mean, YouTube is probably the only real outlier to that because, I mean, they just made it work so much better than internet video was in the 90s. But, all the text-based whatever, forget it. I mean, it's just interesting that all of these things, we get so excited about some pretty new design or something like that, or some new face or something, or people will say, oh, this is the new tech. But really, it's the new tech doing a lot of the same old things. I mean, I would think that innovators in the universe should feel sad because, we're focusing on all these, how to make a better Facebook as opposed to how to make a better jetpack or something. But, I don't know. I think things like 3D printing keep me feeling like there's hope for the universe. But it's also, I mean, theme-wise, 3D printing is another one of those things where freaks are just going to have a heyday because if you're the kind of person who can design the neato, whatever it is, I don't know, neato chair, then we don't have to wait for IKEA anymore, and it doesn't have to cost like it's supposed to be in a museum. And you and your friends can share your patterns or whatever. And so there's just like all these crazy interactions that are really upsetting the deal flow of typical business.
Well, it's interesting because I maybe am a little more optimistic in that you and I were very much, kind of out there on the internet, so we're more exposed to those types of business models. But along with 3D printing, I mean, there's huge strides in like biotech. Like the U.S. is by far the leader in biotech in terms of cancer diagnostics and so on, and in the energy space and alternative energy, we're the leader by far. So there's a lot of innovation that I think we're going to see that actually is rocket science, because nothing on the internet is rocket science. That all is about content and about communication, zero science. But the real sciences do have some innovation happening there.
We don't disagree about that. I would say that, the science outside of the regular business channels. I'm mostly talking about the stuff that gets heavily reported online. But you're right. I mean, there's big stuff in biotech. There's some really incredible stuff. In pharma right now, it just seems like every day we're cracking some particular new drug open or something, and that's quasi interesting. I also think, in weird areas, sort of like, advances in prosthetics and the like, that gets interesting, and how many deaf people suddenly can hear due to some of those new surgeries. So, I mean, quality of life opportunities are really cool. And I always just think of that, I guess it's a meme or something where people say, this is why we can't have nice things. Because at the same time that all these amazing wonders are happening, we're worrying about should we be on WhatsApp or not.
It's true. And look, I give a lot of credit to the super smart people who do all these great things, like discover a new drug and go through that process. For myself, I feel like I'm too old to start a business like that. But then you start to think, well, what is my role? So, for instance, maybe there's a startup revolving around how to connect some of these new technologies to the people who need it, or information about these new technologies to the people who need it. So, for instance, every pharma company probably wants to know all the new drugs that are being worked on by really small companies, just in case, they want to see what's on the horizon. So a newsletter sort of summarizing those latest technologies would be actually interesting to a pharma business. You could charge $10,000 a month subscription to the 6 pharma companies.
Yeah, no, truly that. It's interesting, like that Reese's peanut butter cup model of making business happen, where you say, what does Airbnb teach us about pharma? Or, what are these new, I don't remember what they call these, but those test kitchens that you can go into, and you can basically rent time in a kitchen now that has all the things that the government needs you to have to make sure you're not killing people, to try out your food ideas, for instance, and all that.
I thought that was what the Midwest was for.
You're quite
just kidding.
All the Minnesotans are writing you in right now to complain, but yeah, no, I think that, I'm always interested in that. Like, Julian Smith has made this project. He's my sometimes author on books. He made a project called Breather, which is this idea that maybe you just need a quiet space to take a break, and it could be work stuff, it could be yoga, it could just be a nap. So he's made Breather, and when I asked him, so what's that compete with, like Airbnb? And he goes, no, it competes with Starbucks. And in some ways it competes with like those Regis offices. But, it's I guess then sort of the Airbnb for Starbucks or people who want a quick yoga break, so I think that's interesting.
That is really interesting. Like I was once at a dinner where there was one of the top people from The Gap and one of the top people from Victoria's Secret and a bunch of interesting people around the table. And the guy from The Gap was very upset because he realized that he needed to make his stores a destination as opposed to just a place where people buy clothes. Like people had to want to go to The Gap for community reasons as opposed to just for commerce reasons. And you mentioned Starbucks. They sort of figured it out that people like to hang out in a Starbucks and work on their projects, that he has free Wi-Fi at the Starbucks and so on. I think every kind of physical store needs to learn how to be more of a destination, and it sounds like Julian with Breather is creating just a destination, which is kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, and that also could be the danger, but like any good new startup-y boy, he's got a few pivots in mind in case maybe that doesn't work so well, meaning the infrastructure to make those kinds of interactions could happen, and thus any place could be sort of, take advantage of that Breather mindset. So, yeah, I think that one big trend that I'm seeing, again, that sort of plays to these weird freak ideas is that, we all want something kind of different. The yoga crowd wants something really different than the hardcore, golfing community or something like that. But there are these kind of weird overlaps, and there are people sort of, to use a Dungeons and Dragons term, they're like multi-class characters. And so they're like the wizard thief of our world is maybe yoga / construction worker or something, and they're looking for their tribe. And I think that we're going to find that nowadays. And I think there's going to be someone. Well, I mean, hey, the Mark Devine just released 8 weeks to SEAL Fit, which is a blend of CrossFit, martial arts, and yoga for potentially Navy SEALs candidates, but also fat business schlubs like me just trying to get more fit.
Well, it's funny about the combination of ideas because when I first met my wife, she is a yoga instructor, but she's also from Argentina. So I, of course, put on my entrepreneur's hat and I'm thinking, you have to start tango yoga. I don't know what it is. I have no clue, but it sounds cool. And you're from Argentina and you do yoga. So put it together as tango yoga. But alas, she has never done it. I still don't know what it would be.
In Spanish, tango yoga would be I have yoga. So that would be, it's already branded. It's all perfect. I have yoga, but I like tango yoga.
Right, some kind of like dance yoga, but she wasn't that into it. But I do think the source of good ideas is almost always the combination of ideas. I mean, Facebook, of course, combines the internet with stalking, and it became the largest social network on the planet. So, and almost every internet idea that we use now is a combination of older ideas. So like Airbnb is the internet combined with, hotels and sharing and so on. I always tell people, make 2 lists of separate ideas and then about completely different topics and then combine them to see what you come up with. And the results are always very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Airbnb is Zipcar for your spare room. I think that it's interesting that the other part of that I always think about, and that this is something else I think about the way Freaks is that, for instance, in Boston here, the guy who runs Bo Loco, which is a small chain of burrito companies, he sold his company and he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And so he decided to sign up for Uber and become a cab driver for a while just for fun. Because he didn't have anything else to do for a while. So he was just, the money obviously wasn't huge enough for him to want to do it for the money, but he really loved the conversations and he kind of liked trying to work on the systems and whatever. Airbnb, there's a story in the book even about the fact that, this guy wanted to open a bed and breakfast and his wife said, why don't we start with just one room? I stole that from Alex Franzen. And then, I think that Square and Kickstarter, I mean, basically, we're just removing all those gaps in permission, James. So one of the other cool things that the internet has done since the beginning has said you don't need anyone else's permission. And, everything that fails is always when it's, firewalled in or locked into kind of the old rules. And,
Well, people get scared of that, though. People want permission. Like people assume that there's a stop sign everywhere they turn. We're conditioned to think that, oh, you can't do that until someone says, oh, yeah, okay, it's, you waited long enough, you paid your dues, now you can step through the secret door. Like, I feel like people subconsciously want permission, and that's a big thing to kind of get over if you want to be an entrepreneur or even an employee-nor. You have to get over that feeling of, I can't do this.
I agree. I think that, if I were the kind of guy who, there's always those funny images of, fat, furry guys in tutus. I would love to dress like a fairy princess and have a little.
I haven't seen those. I haven't seen those images, by the way. Are these the sorts of things you search for on Instagram?
Yeah, that's me on the internet, baby. Always looking for fat furry men in tutus.com. But I was thinking, the permission fairy would be a really great website to make, and just have it I don't know, almost like those websites that are single serving websites, the one that like just screams no or whatever, or the It's a Trap website. I would love to one to just say, congratulations, you have permission. Now go do that thing.
Yeah, it reminds me of in 1994, there was a website called The Big Red Button That Does Nothing. And so you go to this website, and it was just a big red button on the front page, and you click it, and it like clicks down and up, but it does nothing. And it was a hugely popular website at the time. Like, they were actually selling ads.
Oh my gosh, never gets old, really. I could see a resurgence of that. The big red button that does nothing .com.
Well, one time, it reminds me of one time I met Uri Geller. I don't know if you know who he is. He's like
spoon bender.
Yeah, he's a famous psychic who bends spoons. He was like friends with Michael Jackson and so on. So I met him, and he wanted to make, UriGeller.com, which is going to be a website about how you can get psychic powers. And he wanted to kind of almost take this idea of the big red button. He wanted to put a big button on the front page of his site, and if you click on it, people would get more psychic. And that was his idea, because he would share his psychic abilities with the website. And so just clicking on this button would get you to be more psychic. So everybody wants to click on something to go forward. I feel it's related to this, permission fantasy that you need to survive or to thrive.
Wow. I'm still back on everyone wants to click somewhere to get forward. I really think you're onto something there. That might be the next book. Yeah,
permission fantasy, the permission fairy.
That's right.
Now, tell me about your first book you did with Julian Smith, who you already mentioned, Trust Agents. It's a New York Times bestseller. I just want to ask a very straightforward question. How many copies you need to sell to be on the New York Times bestseller list?
It varies, but I swear to God, it was the slow week. We only sold like 2,590 copies that week. And that put us in, I think they only count the top 20, and anything below 20 doesn't count. So we weren't even in the top 10 of the New York Times bestseller list.
But I didn't know that. All I know is you're a New York Times bestseller.
Exactly. Well, and that's just it. I mean, there is no asterisk. It just is. And it was a very slow week. It was just 1 week. We were also Wall Street Journal, Amazon, and Inc. and all that. But of course, the only one anyone cares about, it seems, is that. But the next week, you would have had to sell 8,000 copies because it was this huge week. I forget who came out, but it was Gladwell or Godin or any of our friends like that. And I couldn't have even possibly have made it on there. So it was. I always tell people that. I always had that horrible Groucho Marx thought in my head of you never want to belong to a club that would have you. And that's how I felt when we got there. It was a great honor, but it was an honor for about 6 minutes.
And what do you think it did for you in terms of writing career or in terms of your contacts and so on? Like, in a sense, the New York Times gave you permission to do something when it made you a bestseller. What did it give you permission to do?
Oh, well, I'll say this. It did everything for my career because it's amazing how many people say this basic thing, which is, I could say any other credit, but if they hear New York Times bestseller, they go, oh. And, if you're one once, it goes on every other book you've ever written because all it says is from the New York Times bestselling author of, or they just say from the New York Times bestselling author. And that's on my books forevermore. Which is kind of this weird thing. It's like it's a piece of proof. So it's amounted to lots of book deals. It's amounted to lots of people, falsely thinking I'm really smart. And I try really hard to dissuade people from that. I like to say it's bestseller, like not a best idea. It just means people bought a lot of it. And I also tell authors that because authors, whenever they're telling me about their book, are telling me about how it's such a great idea, it's bound to be a bestseller. And I always say, no, the bestseller is the person who knows how to sell books. And In no way do I know that I know how to sell books, but this one time, it was my first ever book. I had done so many things for so many other people that I said, it's 11 years that I've pretty much never asked for a thing, but this new book's coming out. If you were ever thinking about it, what do you think? And we can figure it out.
Have you ever thought about doing any kind of like book marketing for other people?
No, because I'm not that smart. I'm no.
I don't believe that you're not that smart. You're very smart, Chris.
Okay,
author of
I don't know how to bookmark it.
How many books have you written now?
This will be 7. The Freaks is 7, and none of them have sold even as much as Choose Yourself. Choose Yourself blows. You could add all my book sales together, and you beat me. So.
Well, okay, but you've written all these books. That requires some hard work. How many businesses have you started?
3. I think 3 right now, not counting some of the small ones that were crushed before they were even, publicly known to anybody. But yeah.
Well, let's include those. How many ideas have you tried out to the extent that you thought they were going to maybe be a business?
Oh gosh, maybe 20 or 30 or something. I mean, I lost a lot of money in 2011 starting things and then realizing after some investment that it wasn't a good idea. So I was basically my own R&D function for quite a while. But, I learned a lot. I love to say that I paid for an MBA cash in 1 year, but I would say that in a lot of ways it feels like that. I learned how not to do a lot of things, which is very helpful.
And what did you learn? What are some of the things you learned what not to do?
Don't build software that rides on top of somebody else's platform, especially if they're not an ecosystem kind of a player. Don't try to presume.
What's an example of that? I don't know.
Okay, so I started to build a piece of software that was going to help people do something on top of an email service provider such that they would use WordPress to craft really simple templated emails out through an email service provider, because most email service providers' templates are really ugly and horrible and difficult to understand. So I thought maybe I'll just make this WordPress meets email service provider app. And, it was kind of a good idea, except that I spent too much money trying to make it. And the company that I was building it on top of folded. And that was the end of that. So,
that's not good.
But I could have, invested more and just put it on somebody else's platform that was going to stay alive. But it just dawned on me that maybe this is a bad plan, and so I shelved it. The other thing I also thought is a volume thing. Like, I'll make 9 ideas and launch them at the same time because Branson does that. But, Branson has a few thousand more employees than I do. And so what he does is he hands his idea to somebody who can run with it. And he's sort of the executive producer of the movie. But if you ever watch the movie credits roll by, there's a little more than just the executive producer. And I didn't have that infrastructure. So I learned that repeatedly in the last few years.
Well, in 2006, I was in a situation where I had to start another business. And I went through a similar thing. I started 9 businesses simultaneously. None of them worked out, and I had a business partner at the time, and he was like, okay, let's just give up on this. It's too much money. And we tried one more final idea, 10th idea, and that one worked out, which was stockpicker.com. But it was definitely getting scary. Like, how do you deal with that fear when things are not working out? And you mentioned it earlier, people are afraid to go homeless. I'm afraid. I've had many different successes, failures, successes. I'm always afraid, no matter where I am in the cycle, I'm always afraid of going homeless, even though, as you pointed out, that's a ridiculous fear. But how do you get over that fear? Because you need to get over that in order to start being successful.
I think that it's tricky. One of the things a lot of people do are these sort of all or nothing kind of projects. I've had a lot of people come up to me at events. This is the most terrifying sentence I ever heard at an event, besides one guy who told me that he took a beer bottle off the table that I was at so that now he had a copy of my DNA. That was terrifying. But the second most terrifying thing that I've heard much more often is someone will come up to me and say, I'm really inspired by you. I quit my job and now I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. And I say, what? Like, I never quit my job. I had a salary all the way up until I could cover my own salary with my own earnings. And, I never once was sort of floating with no money in this whole project. Now, there's months where I couldn't pay myself very much, but I never just once turned off the pay spigot and decided, let's just make money happen, because it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I'll tell you, with my first business, I stayed at my full-time job probably for a full 2 years after I started the business, just And at this point, the business was on the side, doing well. I had about 15 to 20 employees. And it was only then, when I felt like I could pay my salary for at least 6 months, that I quit my job. And on my first day of being full-time entrepreneur at this new business, we lost like a huge client. And so I could no longer pay my salary for the 6 months, as far as I knew, unless I got a new client. And so I literally like just went out of the office and started crying because I couldn't deal with the fact that I had made this decision finally, and then I got afraid again. Like that was the first time I encountered that fear, the first of maybe hundreds of times, and it's really not a pleasant feeling.
No, not even at all. And, I got a really early piece of advice from somebody when I started to do my consulting type business. And it was, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. I'm not going to remember. Anyway, he said this one thing. He basically said, you should make sure that your customer should never be more than 15% of your revenue. So any one customer can't be more than 15% of your revenue. And I thought that was huge because it just seems like, once you get that equation down, you start going, oh, I can better plan for this. Because he goes, you can operate at 85%, but it's pretty hard if you drop 50% of your revenue in one shot. And so if I hadn't had that piece of advice, I would have, made even more mistakes than I did.
Well, the one time that I had a customer that was more than since that first experience, that I had a customer that was more than 15% of my revenue, I gave them ownership in the company so that I would guarantee that they couldn't leave me.
That's interesting.
I essentially handed over 50% of the company to guarantee their revenues, and it was they were essentially 100% of my revenue, so it worked out. And then they were so much tied to me that they had to then buy the company in order to, I was so much related to their own balance sheet at that point that they had to buy me to make it worth it to them. So it saved me.
It's a beautiful plan.
Yeah, another time actually, I had another business, my fund of hedge funds. I had one investor who was maybe about 80% of my investment, and he then went out of business. So I had to give him his money back, and it was a very stressful period because I didn't have the money. I'd already invested it, so it was very stressful. I actually bought a book, The Tao of Star Wars, so I wanted to basically use the principles from Star Wars to survive this horrible period in my business.
I think you've written about that, but what I don't remember, my memento level memory lately, is how did that work for you?
It ended up working out really well because he was in a position where he had to return money to his investors, and so we ended up doing like a deal with all of his investors, where they then became direct investors in me, and it worked out okay for them. So
there you go.
And it worked out okay for me. It worked out okay for everyone. He can't stand me anymore, but that happens in business quite a bit.
That's, business is a strange thing like that, especially when a lot of money is moving back and forth. But I don't know. It strikes me that your goals for future business might have a lot more relationship mindedness than your past businesses. But I just might be making that up.
I think I no longer want to do a business at all because I think this is another common mistake that many people make. They think that in order to be independent and on their own and even generate wealth, they have to start a business and either sell it or have it make, millions of dollars in sales. But I think there's a lot of ways now in today's world where you can build wealth and be self-reliant and independent without just starting a business and selling it. I think you could be in the middle between transactions to other businesses, or you can, sell content or advise people and get pieces of their businesses. And if you do that across 20 businesses, and some of them do well, you're going to be very successful. So I think there's a lot of ways to generate wealth without just doing a startup. And in fact, I would say all of my business now is relationship based, probably because I no longer think about starting a business.
I think that's super clever. Very big.
Well, and it sounds like a lot of what you're doing, like Owner Mag is certainly relationship based. You don't really have a lot of employees for that. So you've created a magazine, Owner, which you have online at ownermag.com, which I'm a writer for, happy to say. So, I'm sure that's an interesting business for you.
Well, it's so businesses are built to make money or whatnot, and owner is the smallest of the revenue streams that I have right now. But I just keep believing that there's some value there that will be a lot more picked up by people. So I'm not worried about the revenue right away, which is the first time I think I've said that running a business. That seems more Silicon Valley to me. But what I feel is that what I've said to a lot of people is that Owner Magazine is actually more like a loyalty program cleverly disguised as a magazine. And once we get that concept to make even more accurate sense with some other announcements that'll be coming out, I think that it's going to be an exciting time, because really what I'm trying to teach is sort of business loyalty 2.0, because I think a lot of people, one of the things that really frustrates me is that, there's this concept called loyalty right now, but I don't mean those little plastic cards on your key rings. That's data. And for the most part, data isn't loyalty. It's always used against you most times. Like grocery stores never say, oh, hey, Chris, I noticed you're out of eggs. But they do say, I noticed that you buy these eggs. We'd rather you buy these eggs because they paid us to ask you to do that. So I'm really trying to think up ways to help a business that could benefit from loyalty and relationship mindedness. Real estate's one of those kinds of companies, hospitality, restauranting, obviously. There's lots of businesses where loyalty is a valuable tool. And I'm just thinking that there's a lot of ways to spin that. And this magazine is just kind of the prow of that vessel. So we shall see.
Well, it all sounds good. You have a lot of things going on. You have Owner Mag, you have the Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, which just came out, which I really encourage everyone to buy. I sort of think, like, with Choose Yourself, there's kind of this concept that everybody needs to, it's like what you were saying, stop asking for permission, choose themselves because the gatekeepers are going away. And there's this flip side where the economy is such that you have to now start thinking in more self-reliant ways, because there is no loyalty in the corporate system to take care of you. Like, that is kind of was a fairy tale to begin with. And I sort of feel like there's almost a library of books, of which, Freaks is one of them, that all are around the same concept. And, Seth Godin has written about this. Our mutual pal Michael Ellsberg is coming out, with a book, You Should Invest in Yourself. I think there's a lot of this concept that's out there now. People are realizing that the traditional corporate America has let them down. And more than ever before, you need to essentially choose yourself or be a freak or do whatever and find that personal success.
I totally agree. And I'm thrilled to be someone sort of, finding a genre. Well, I mean, it's like that post you made about that there should be some kind of a scene. And I said something about, boy, it'd be nice to have one. And Clay Hebert said, no, you're already in a scene. And I think I'm part of that scene. Yeah,
exactly. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for coming on this show. It is the first of hopefully many times you come on the show. And I've been on your podcast, of course, many times, which is always fascinating. I encourage people to buy your book. I'm really excited about it.
You're very kind, James. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk.
Thanks, Chris.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
Building a stronger financial foundation? Good plan. Northwestern Mutual's Guide to Good Financial Planning can help you balance spending and saving, set goals, and start creating the life you want to be living. You'll learn how the tools in your financial plan reinforce each other to help you minimize taxes and offset potential risks. Grow your confidence by strengthening your finances today at northwesternmutual.com/goodplan. The Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.